I never planned to spend my life behind a counter taking orders from people who barely look me in the eye, but life doesn't really wait for you to be ready. It just happens all at once: unexpected bills, emergency hospital visits, a baby who needs formula, rent that keeps rising even though your paychecks don't. That's how I ended up working double shifts at Casey's Bar and Grill in Cleveland, Ohio. I used to tell myself it was temporary, but temporary stretches fast when you have a 6-year-old counting on you and the universe keeps testing how far your limits can bend before they break. It was a Friday evening, the kind when the air feels heavy even before the bar fills up. I was already tired before the dinner rush hit. 2 tables had complained that their food wasn't Instagram-worthy. A couple had argued loudly enough to make the manager grumpy, and someone had spilled beer on my sneakers. I tried shrugging it off, repeating the same thing I repeat every day. You're doing this for Ethan. Just breathe. My son's smile is the only thing that keeps me from collapsing some days. I tied my light blue uniform tighter around my waist and pushed my hair back, trying to look halfway presentable. The mirror behind the bar showed a young woman who looked much older than 27 dark circles under my eyes. Skin pale from stress, lips pressed into that shape you get when you're holding yourself together with invisible thread. People don't see any of that, of course. They just see the waitress, not the single mom, not the survivor, not the woman praying she make enough tips to cover groceries and her son's asthma medication. The place was buzzing music, clinking glasses, loud conversations. The usual mix of factory workers, couples stopping in after a movie, older regulars who sat quietly sipping cheap whiskey. I knew most faces. That night felt normal, predictable, until the door swung open and 4 college-aged guys walked in like they owned the oxygen in the room. Loud, laughing, jostling each other, wearing varsity jackets and confidence bought with daddy's credit card. The kind of guys who never had to work for anything except maybe their tan. They sat in my section. Of course they did. Before I even reached them, I knew it would be trouble. The one in front, tall, muscular, messy blonde hair, gave me a slow, deliberate once-over, the kind that makes your skin crawl even though he never touches you. His friends followed his lead, smirking like they shared a joke about me that I wasn't invited to hear. "Hey, sweetheart," Blondie said, leaning back like he was posing for a magazine nobody reads. "You look stressed." "You should smile more." I forced a polite expression. "What can I get you guys?" "That depends," another one said, a brunette with a backward cap and the kind of grin that only appears when entitlement meets boredom. "What do you recommend, babe?" The table laughed. I breathed through my nose. "We have barbecue sliders on special. And our beer is 2 for 1 until 8. So what's 2 for 1 mean?" the one with the cap asked. "Do you come with the drinks?" More laughter. Too loud. Too show-offy. The kind of laughter used to establish dominance, not humor. I didn't answer. I just wrote down their order: 4 beers, 4 sliders, and walked away. Behind me, I heard one of them whisper loudly enough for the whole room to hear. "Dude, she's got that tired single mom energy. If they only knew how right they were." But that's the thing about people like them, they don't want to understand. They want to poke. They want to see what they can get away with. They want to feel powerful at someone else's expense. I carried their drinks back, keeping my posture straight even though inside I felt that familiar sting, that mix of anger and humiliation that comes from being seen as something disposable. When I placed the beers on the table, Blondie brushed his hand against my wrist. Not an accident, a test. I pulled my hand away. "Please don't do that." Instead of stopping, he smirked. "Relax, you're so uptight." "It was just a touch." "Don't touch her," someone muttered from another table. I didn't even see who said it. It didn't matter, because the boys ignored it completely. I took a step back, trying to keep distance, but they leaned forward like they were reeling me back into their gravity. "You got a name?" the one with the cap asked. "Yes," I said, And I'm working, that earned a mocking whistle. Feisty, I like that. I turned away and headed toward the counter to pick up their food. My legs felt heavier than normal. It's amazing your body knows when danger is coming before your mind catches up. Something about the air around that table felt wrong. Too charged, too unstable. I delivered their sliders 5 minutes later. They made more comments under their breath, loud enough for me to hear, not loud enough for anyone else to pretend they did. Comments about my legs, my chest, my uniform. One of them tried to tug at the hem of my dress when I leaned over to set the basket of fries down. That was when I straightened up and said, "If this behavior continues, I'll get the manager." Blondie raised an eyebrow like he'd just been inconvenienced. Whoa, calm down. We're just having fun. It's not fun for me. Oh, come on, he said, nudging his friend. She's sensitive. Probably hasn't been touched in years. Something inside me tightened. I wasn't angry. Anger is clean, sharp. What I felt was heavier. More like a slow-burning exhaustion that reaches your bones. The kind of exhaustion that makes you want to walk out the door and never come back. But I couldn't. I had rent. I had responsibilities. I had Ethan. I'll check on your table in a bit, I said, turning away. Don't take too long, Catboy called after me. We might miss your pretty face. I didn't look back. If I did, I knew I'd break, cry, scream, do something that would cost me my job. I took another table's order, refilled water, wiped down the counter. I tried to pretend my breathing wasn't shaky. I tried to pretend I wasn't noticing how the boys were growing louder, bolder, more restless. Alcohol does that, peels off the thin layer of decency some people have. When I returned to check on them, Blondie grabbed my wrist again, harder this time. I froze. Where you been? He said. We need another round. Let go of me. He smiled, but his eyes were cold. Say please. Something about the way he said it made the whole room feel smaller. The laughter around us faded. The music seemed quieter. My vision tunneled. Let go, I repeated. And then it happened. He shoved me. Not a playful push, not a bump. A full force shove to the shoulder that threw me off balance. My tray tilted. The drinks flew. The glass shattered on the checkered floor. People gasped. My knee hit the edge of a table. My uniform tore at the seam near my chest. I grabbed the edge of a booth to keep from collapsing completely. For a moment, everything was silent. Absolutely silent. The entire bar froze. People stared, mouths open, eyes wide, hands paused mid-air. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke, nobody helped. And I felt it, that familiar truth I'd spent years trying not to believe. When you're at the bottom, people hesitate before deciding if you're worth saving. I swallowed hard, heat rising behind my eyes. My chest ached where the fabric had ripped. My pride stung worse than the physical impact. He laughed. Actually laughed. Relax. You're so dramatic, Blondie said, like shoving a woman was nothing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to disappear. I wanted anyone to say this wasn't okay. But the whole bar just stared. I felt small, invisible, breakable. And in that split second, as I tried to gather myself from the floor, I believed the worst version of myself. Maybe I'm just the waitress. Maybe that's all they see. For a few seconds I stayed frozen, my hands still gripping the edge of the booth, glass crunching under my shoe as I tried to steady myself. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out everything else. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, like bright lights in a dark room, but none of them reached out. Not yet. The manager, Tom, glanced over from behind the bar, his face tight. For a moment I thought he would rush toward me, that he would yell at the guy, throw them out, do something. Instead, he hesitated, drying the same glass with the same towel, his jaw clenched, eyes calculating. Blondie's friends laughed nervously, like even they weren't sure if this had gone too far. One of them mumbled, "Dude, chill," but he didn't offer me a hand, didn't apologize. I straightened as best I could, pulling my torn uniform up with one hand, trying to cover the ripped seam near my chest. I could feel the burning sting of humiliation creeping up my neck. My cheeks were hot. My eyes watered, but I swallowed the tears back down. Crying in front of them would be like giving them a trophy. I forced myself to breathe, in, out, somewhere deep inside. Under all the exhaustion and fear, there was a tiny voice whispering, "You are not what they think you are. You are not just what is happening to you right now." But that voice felt far away. I bent down and started picking up pieces of glass with my free hand because that's what you do when you're the one at the bottom. You clean up the mess, even when you didn't make it. "Hey," Blondie said, leaning forward. "Don't be such a drama queen. It was an accident." I didn't look at him. "Please stop talking to me." "What, now you're too good to talk to us?" he scoffed. "You should be grateful we're even here. We're probably the best tippers you'll get all week." His friends looked at each other, unsure. One of them shifted in his seat, avoiding my eyes. Another scratched his neck, staring at the broken glass. Guilt flickered in their expressions, but none of them did anything. It's funny how people can feel bad and still stay seated. As I focused on the shattered pieces in my hand, I noticed another pair of shoes step into my field of vision. Heavy boots. Old, worn, but polished carefully. I looked up and saw a man I'd seen 100 times but never really seen. He was one of our regulars, late 50s, maybe early 60s. Gray beard, deep-set eyes, always in the same flannel shirt and faded cap. He sat at the far end of the bar almost every night, nursing a cup of coffee or one beer that lasted him hours. Never caused trouble, never talked much. He just watched. Now he was standing. "You all right, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice low, steady. I opened my mouth to say yes out of habit, to minimize everything, but the word caught in my throat. "I am fine," I said anyway, because that's what women like me are trained to say. He didn't look convinced. His eyes moved from my face to the torn fabric, then to Blondie and his friends. The room somehow got quieter, or maybe I just became suddenly more aware. He turned his body slightly, placing himself between me and their table, not aggressively, but firmly. "That how you treat a woman?" he asked the boys. "That how your mamas raised you?" Blondie rolled his eyes. "Oh, here we go, another hero." The older man didn't flinch. "No," he said calmly. "Just a man who's seen this kind of thing before." "It never ends well," one of the guys with him snorted nervously. "It was an accident, man, relax." "Accident?" the older man repeated. "You call shoving a woman an accident?" Blondie leaned back in his seat like he was bored. "Look, it's none of your business. We're just having fun." "She's acting like we assaulted her." A muscle in the older man's jaw twitched. I noticed his hand curl into a fist at his side, then slowly relax. He was choosing his reaction carefully. "What's your name, son?" he asked. Blondie frowned. "Why do you care?" "Because I've seen your face before," the man said. "On TV." Something shifted. The boys went quiet. Blondie shifted in his seat, annoyed but suddenly a little less cocky. The older man tilted his head. "Your daddy's name is Wilson Carter, isn't it?" A murmur rippled through the bar. I felt my gaze dart between them, my heart pounding again, but this time with a different kind of tension. Blondie's face hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about." The older man's eyes stayed on him, unblinking. "He's that big shot real estate developer, right? The one always on the news talking about values and responsibility and raising the next generation of leaders?" A woman at a nearby booth whispered, "Oh my God, that's him?" I thought he looked familiar. Blondie shifted in his seat again, glancing around as if suddenly aware that everyone was looking at him, really looking. "Man, this is ridiculous. We're just out having a good time. You all are overreacting." The older man stepped closer to their table, not towering over them, just standing there with a certainty that felt heavier than anger. Funny, he said. Your dad's always on TV preaching about integrity. Wonder what he'd say if he saw you lay hands on a woman half your size just because you're bored. Someone's phone camera made a faint sound as it started recording. I saw a girl in a red sweater at a corner table, her eyes wide, her hands shaking slightly as she held her phone up. She looked at me as if asking for permission. I didn't have the strength to respond. The boys noticed the phone. Hey, stop filming, Catboy snapped. You don't have the right to record us. The girl swallowed. You didn't ask if you had the right to shove her. A few people murmured in agreement. I watched the scene unfold like I wasn't in my own body, like I was detached, floating somewhere above, studying human behavior in slow motion. There was something surreal about seeing a room full of people finally begin to choose a side. Turn that off, Blondie barked. Now. For the first time since I started working there, I heard Tom, the manager, raise his voice. Enough, he said, stepping out from behind the bar. This isn't a frat party. This is my place, and she is my staff. You put your hands on her, you clean out your tab and leave, now. Blondie snorted. You're gonna kick us out? Do you know who my father is? Tom didn't blink. I know what I just saw. I barely touched her, Blondie protested, his voice rising. She slipped. Look at her, she's clumsy. I'm not paying for that. He gestured toward the broken glass on the floor like it was evidence of my incompetence, not his aggression. I felt heat rush back to my face, but this time it was anger, not the quiet, suffocating kind, but something that felt clearer, sharper. My voice came out before I could overthink it. You shoved me, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You grabbed me and you shoved me. The room went quiet again. Everyone's attention snapped toward me like I just flipped on a spotlight. He stared at me, eyes narrowing, probably shocked that I dared to speak. People like him expect you to shrink. To say, it's fine. To joke it off. You're exaggerating, he said. Why are you even talking? Don't you want your job? There it was. The threat. The unspoken deal. Stay quiet, stay small, keep your income. All my late nights, double shifts, missed bedtimes with Ethan, nights of crying in the bathroom so he wouldn't hear it all came rushing up like a wave I couldn't hold back anymore. You don't get to threaten my job because you don't know how to act like a human being, I said, my voice trembling but steady at the same time. Someone clapped. Just once, quickly, like they were testing the air. Then another. And another. I turned and saw the woman in the booth who always ordered the same grilled chicken salad watching me with tears in her eyes. Next to her was a man I'd seen a few times, his hand resting on his cane, nodding slowly. The older man in the flannel spoke again, quieter this time but somehow louder than anyone else. She's right. He turned to the rest of the bar. How many of you have watched something like this happen and told yourselves it wasn't your business? Silence. But the uncomfortable kind. The kind that makes you face yourself. He looked back at the boys. This isn't about one shove. It's about who you think you are when nobody stops you. Catboy rolled his eyes. Is this some kind of lecture? Maybe, the older man said. But it's one you need. More people had their phones out now. Not out of obsession with drama, but something else, like they were finally realizing that ignoring things didn't make them go away. Tom took a deep breath. All right. Here's what's happening. You boys are done for the night. You're paying your tab. And you're leaving. I'm not paying for any of that, Blondie said again, pointing at the floor. That's her fault. She dropped it. I felt something inside me harden. For years I had swallowed insults, endured comments, brushed off unwanted touches, all because I needed the money. I had convinced myself that keeping quiet was survival. But at that moment, looking at his smug face, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to truly see. Every time I stayed silent, I gave people like him permission to keep doing it. It wasn't about me being dramatic. It was about him believing his actions had no consequences. You shoved me, I said again, this time more firmly. This wasn't an accident. You grabbed me and you shoved me. The girl in the red sweater lowered her phone just enough to speak. I got it on video, she said. He shoved her. Catboy turned toward her. Delete that, now. Tom stepped between them. You don't tell my customers what to do. You're leaving, now. Blondie laughed bitterly, shaking his head. You have no idea the kind of trouble you're asking for. My dad won't be proud when he sees this, the older man interrupted. You think your last name is a shield. It's not. It's a mirror. Everything you do reflects right back on it. His words hung in the air. He looked at me then, his gaze gentle. You don't have to keep apologizing for existing, he said. You didn't do anything wrong. My chest tightened. No one has said something like that to me in a long time, maybe ever. I glanced around and noticed something strange. People were no longer just watching. They were participating. Nods, murmurs, eyes meeting mine with solidarity instead of indifference. A man in a work uniform at a nearby table spoke up. She's here every night. Works harder than anyone. I've seen it. And I've seen the way jerks like you treat her. Not tonight. A woman added, my sister went through the same thing at her job. Everyone saw. No one helped. I wish someone had stood up for her. It struck me then. This moment wasn't just about me and some spoiled boy with a rich dad. It was about all the silent things people had swallowed for years. All the times they told themselves, it's not my place to say anything, or it's not my problem. Something was shifting. Blondie sensed it too. His shoulders tensed. You people are insane, he said, scanning the room like surely someone had to be on his side. We didn't do anything that bad. Bad enough, the older man said. Bad enough, Tom echoed. I stood there, still holding the edge of the booth with one hand and my torn uniform with the other, and realized I was at a crossroads. I could tell Tom it was fine, beg him not to escalate, try to smooth it over the way I always did. Or I could let this moment be what it wanted to be, a line, a boundary. My voice was quiet when I spoke, but it carried. I want them to leave. Tom nodded. You heard her. You're done. Blondie stared at me with a mix of anger and disbelief, like he couldn't understand why his usual tricks weren't working. You'll regret this, he spat. All of you. He reached into his pocket, slammed some bills on the table, and pushed his chair back so hard it scraped loudly against the floor. His friends followed, muttering curses under their breath. As they walked toward the door, the older man's voice stopped them. The law will want to see that video, he said, looking toward the girl in the red sweater. And so will your father, I imagine. Blondie paused at the door, looked back, and for a split second, his mask slipped. Underneath the arrogance, I saw something else, fear. Maybe for his reputation. Maybe for the first time in his life, he was realizing that someone might actually hold him accountable. He slammed the door behind him. The bar didn't erupt in applause. It wasn't one of those movie moments where everyone cheers and the music swells. Instead, there was a heavy, thoughtful silence, like the room itself was taking a breath for the first time in a long while. My hands were shaking. My legs felt weak. I suddenly became aware of the sting in my knee where I'd hit the table, of the cold draft against my skin where my uniform had torn. You should sit down, the woman from the salad booth said softly. Do you need ice? I started, but my voice cracked. Tom gently touched my shoulder. Go to the back, Sarah, he said. I'll cover the floor for a bit. Take a minute. We'll talk after. I nodded, but before I turned away, I looked at the older man. Thank you, I whispered. He shook his head. "Don't thank me for doing the bare minimum," he said. "But if you want to thank me, don't go back to thinking you're small after tonight." His words sank into me like seeds landing in soil that had finally been tilled open. I made my way to the back room, each step feeling both heavier and lighter at the same time. Inside the staff room, I closed the door and leaned against it, finally letting the tears I'd held back fall. Not just because of the shove, not just because of the humiliation, but because for the first time in a long time I hadn't been completely alone. I slid down until I was sitting on the floor, my knees pulled to my chest, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw Ethan's picture on the lock screen, him at the park, grinning with his front teeth missing. I wiped my eyes and opened the text from my neighbor, who was watching him. "Ethan drew you a picture," it read. "He says you're his hero." I stared at the words until they blurred. Hero. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a woman who'd been shoved to the ground in front of a room full of people. But maybe, I thought, heroes don't always feel like heroes in the moment. Maybe they just choose not to disappear. I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Somewhere in the middle of that breath, something shifted inside me, a decision. A quiet one, but strong. I didn't know yet that what had just happened in that bar would ripple far beyond those walls, that videos would be shared, that conversations would be sparked, that my life would change in ways I couldn't imagine. All I knew in that small, cramped staff room was this: I was tired of shrinking. And tonight, for once, the room had shrunk around him instead of me. I stayed in the staff room longer than I meant to, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20. Time felt strange, like it had stretched and collapsed all at once. I wiped the rest of the tears from my cheeks and tried to pull the ripped seam of my uniform together, but the tear was too large. The fabric wouldn't hold. I tied my apron higher to cover as much as I could, then looked at my reflection in the small metal panel of the fridge door. My eyes were red, my hair messy, my chest blotchy from crying. For a moment, shame surged through me again. Not because of what happened, but because of how I looked. How many times had I apologized for existing, for taking up space, for being visible? I took another shaky breath. "You're okay," I whispered to myself. "You're still here." There was a soft knock on the door. "It's me," Tom said. I stood up and wiped my hands on my apron before opening the door. Tom stepped inside and closed it quietly behind him. He was trying to look calm, but I could see the storm behind his eyes. "Sarah, I'm sorry," he said, the words heavy. "I should have come over sooner," I swallowed. "It's fine." "It's not fine." I looked away, not sure how to respond. Tom wasn't a bad guy. He was just, like most people, cautious, afraid to intervene too quickly, afraid of making a situation worse or losing business. "I called the police," he said. "They're on their way." My stomach tightened. "Tom, I don't know if..." "You don't have to talk to them if you don't want to," he said. "But what they did, that's not something we sweep under the rug." I nodded slowly, and for the first time since the shove, I let myself lean against the wall and exhaled deeply. "What about the video?" I asked. "It's all over the bar now," he said. "The girl in the red sweater has it. A few others too. People are angry. Really angry." A part of me was relieved, but another part was terrified. I didn't want the entire world watching me get shoved and humiliated. I didn't want strangers deciding who I was based on 10 seconds of footage. "I don't want this to ruin my life," I whispered. "Sarah," Tom said gently, "the only person whose life might get ruined tonight is his." He wasn't wrong. But that didn't make it easier. "Take a minute," he said. "Then come back out when you're ready. We're with you. All of us." After he left, I pressed my palms against my eyes and inhaled slowly until my heartbeat steadied. I didn't know if I was ready, but I knew I couldn't hide in that room forever. When I finally walked back toward the door, I paused with my hand on the handle, bracing myself. The moment I stepped out, dozens of eyes met mine, not with judgment or curiosity, but with something I hadn't seen in a long time, compassion. The older man in the flannel was still by the counter, his posture straight, protective in a quiet way. The girl in the red sweater held her phone against her chest as if guarding evidence. The couple in the booth, the woman who had tear-filled eyes, the man with the cane, they all looked at me like I wasn't invisible anymore. It was overwhelming. I had to blink a few times to keep from crying again. Then the front door burst open, letting in a gust of cold air and 2 police officers. Everyone tensed. I felt the room tighten like a held breath. The officers approached Tom first. He gestured toward me, but before they even reached me, the older man stepped forward. "Officers," he said, voice steady. "I saw everything." So did half this room. Blondie and his friends had been standing outside. They were brought back in. Each one looked more nervous than the next except Blondie, who tried to look confident but couldn't quite pull it off. One officer asked, "Ma'am, do you want to file a complaint?" The room held its breath again. Every eye turned to me. I opened my mouth, but my voice wouldn't come out. Years of conditioning told me to stay quiet, avoid conflict, keep my job, protect my stability. But another part of me, the part awakened by what had just happened, pushed back. Before I could answer, the older man placed a hand gently on the counter beside me and said, not to me but to the room, "This isn't about just one shove. It's about a pattern. A woman working hard, being harassed, being disrespected, being touched, being attacked. How much more should she take before someone says she doesn't deserve this?" His words hit me right in the chest. I felt something inside me crack, something old, something that had been held together by fear and necessity. I do want to file a report," I finally said. My voice trembled, but I didn't look away. Blondie scoffed loudly. "Are you serious? This is ridiculous. We didn't assault her. She's just trying to ruin my life." The officer turned to him. "Sir, we saw the video." His face went pale, his mouth opened, then closed. "What video?" I asked. The officer nodded toward the girl in the red sweater. She held her phone up. "I sent it to the bar's email. And I saved it. And I backed it up," she said, her voice shaking with determination. "Just in case," Tom added, "and a few other customers recorded parts of it too." The officers pulled Blondie aside. His friends stepped back like they didn't want to be associated with him anymore. "This is insane," he kept muttering. "This is blown way out of," the officer cut him off. "Hands behind your back!" Gasps rippled through the bar. Even I froze. "What?" Blondie choked. "You can't be serious." Your dad isn't here," the officer interrupted. "You put your hands on her. Several witnesses saw it. You're being detained for assault." His face contorted with disbelief and panic. He looked out at the crowd as if begging someone to step in to save him, to say this wasn't real. But nobody moved, nobody defended him. Because the truth was undeniable. Seeing him get handcuffed right there in the bar didn't make me feel triumphant. It didn't make me feel powerful. It just made me feel equal. Like finally, someone who'd always been above consequences had to meet the same reality the rest of us face every day. His friends were questioned next. They stuttered, contradicted themselves, tried to downplay everything, but the video and the crowd's testimony were louder than their excuses. When the officers walked him toward the door, his anger cracked into fear again. "Please," he said to the older man. "Please don't send that video to my dad." The older man looked at him with a quiet, unshakable certainty. "I'm not sending anything," he said. "But someone else will," the room murmured. Blondie, handcuffed and red-faced, stared at the floor as he was led outside. The door shut behind him with a heavy thud. Silence filled the room again, this time not uncomfortable but cleansing, like the air had been scrubbed clean. Tom turned to me. "Sarah, come with me," he said gently. "We need to talk." My stomach tightened. I followed him to his office at the back of the bar. The older man gave me a reassuring nod as I passed. Inside the office, Tom took a deep breath and sank into the chair behind his desk. "Sarah, first, are you okay?" "I should have asked you that earlier." I sat down slowly. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I think I'm still processing." "I want you to know," he said, leaning forward, "this wasn't your fault. None of it. And I should have intervened faster." "I'm sorry for hesitating." I nodded. I appreciated the apology, even though it dug up a truth I'd been avoiding. How often workplaces rely on people like me to endure instead of protect. "Here's the thing," Tom continued. "I've been thinking for a long time. This place has been slipping. I've allowed customers to cross lines because I was afraid of losing business. I've let my staff handle too much alone. That changes tonight." I frowned slightly, not expecting that. "Tom, what are you saying?" "I'm giving you a raise," he said. "Not a small one, a real one. And starting next week, you get the morning shift. More stable customers. Better environment." A lump formed in my throat. "Why?" "Because you've been carrying more weight than any employee should. And because I should have done better by you a long time ago." The room blurred slightly as tears welled again. I blinked them away. I don't know what to say." "Say yes." Tom smiled weakly. I managed a shaky laugh. "Yes." "And Sarah," he added, leaning back, "if you want to take a few days off, paid, I'll approve it. No question, paid days off." I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard those words directed toward me. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded. "You deserve better than what happened tonight." "A lot better." I stepped out of the office after we finished and found the bar quieter now. People were talking softly among themselves. Some were leaving. Some lingered. The older man in the flannel was still there, sipping his coffee. When he saw me, he gave me a small nod, like he was checking if I was okay. I approached him. "I never got your name," I said softly. He set his cup down. "Bill." "Thank you, Bill." He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, Sarah. I just did what I wish someone had done for my sister years ago." My heart clenched. "I'm sorry," I said. He nodded again, slow and thoughtful. "It's all right. The world's got a way of circling things back. Tonight, it circled back to them." I sat down at the counter, exhausted, sore, emotionally drained. Bill didn't pry. He just sat there in that quiet, grounded presence of his. "You know," he said after a while, "there's something you should understand." "What's that?" "You think you're invisible," he said, "but you're not. People notice you. Maybe they don't always speak up, but they see you. They see how hard you work. They see the way you carry yourself. You're not small. You're steady. Steady." It was such a simple word, but it landed in me like a revelation. I looked down at my hands cracked from chemicals and winter, hands that had worked since I was 16. Hands that had held my son through every fever and nightmare. Hands that had been shoved but didn't break. Maybe steady was exactly what I was. As I sat there absorbing everything, the door opened again. The girl in the red sweater approached with her phone. "Hey," she said softly, I just wanted to check on you. And I want you to know your story is already spreading." "Not in a bad way, in a hopeful way." "Hopeful?" I asked. She nodded. People in the comments on the local Facebook group, they're talking about how they would have stayed quiet too, but now they're rethinking things. It's making people reflect. I swallowed hard, overwhelmed. The thought that my humiliation, the shove, the tear, the silence was somehow turning into a lesson for strangers felt surreal. "I don't want to be a spectacle," I said. She shook her head. You're not. You're a reminder. A reminder of what? That ordinary people deserve respect, she said. That silence helps the wrong side. That being tired doesn't mean being weak. My eyes watered again. I blinked them away. Thank you, I whispered. You're brave, she said. I don't know if anyone's told you that. But you are. I didn't feel brave. I felt wrung out. But I didn't correct her. Because something deep inside me knew she was speaking to the part of me that had decided not to stay down. By the time the bar closed, the crowd had thinned. Bill was the last to leave. He tipped me well, but more importantly he said, "Take care of yourself, and your boy." "I will," I said. "Thanks, Bill." When I finally stepped outside into the cold Ohio night, I didn't shiver. The air felt different, cleaner somehow. Like something had shifted not just in the bar, but in me. I pulled my coat tighter and started the walk toward the bus stop. My knee ached, my chest hurt where the seam had torn, and my emotions felt tangled and raw. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. And even though I had no idea how big the consequences of tonight would become, I felt something new stirring quietly inside me, like life had finally cracked open a small window and fresh air was rushing in. The next morning, my body woke up before my alarm, but my mind didn't feel like it was done sleeping. I lay there in the dim light of my small apartment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, replaying everything in my head like a movie I hadn't agreed to star in. The shove, the glass, the silence, Bill's voice, the girl's phone, the handcuffs. For a few seconds, I almost convinced myself I'd exaggerated all, that maybe it had looked worse than it was. That's how deep it goes, this habit of minimizing your own pain. Then my knee throbbed when I shifted my leg, and the bruise on my shoulder ached, and reality snapped back into focus. I turned my head and saw Ethan sleeping next to me, his small face relaxed, his mouth slightly open, clutching the frayed stuffed dinosaur he'd carried since he was 3. Sometimes he crawled into my bed in the middle of the night without me even noticing until morning. Last night I'd gotten home, so late he was already asleep at the neighbor's, and when she walked him over half awake, he just wrapped his arms around my neck and mumbled, "Mommy, you're home," like that was the only thing that mattered in the universe. I watched his chest rise and fall for a moment and thought, if he saw what happened last night, would he be ashamed of me? Or proud? My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached for it carefully so I wouldn't wake him. There were more notifications than I'd ever seen in my life. Texts from coworkers, a missed call from an unknown number, a voicemail from Tom, and a link from the girl in the red sweater. I saved her contact as Lily from the bar. Her message read, "It's everywhere now. I hope you're okay. Call me if you're not." Under it was a link to a local community Facebook group. I hesitated before tapping it, worried my heart might not be ready. But avoiding things hadn't exactly worked well for me in the past. The video started mid-argument, shaky but clear enough. There I was, holding the tray, trying to back away. There was the grab, the shove, the fall, the tear. My face flushed, then tight. For a moment I wanted to throw the phone across the room. It's a strange thing, seeing yourself as others saw you in your weakest moment. Then the video kept going. It captured the silence, then Bill stepping forward. His voice steady, direct. Tom stepping in. The girl saying, "You didn't ask if you had the right to shove her." The room shifting. People speaking up. My voice shaking but firm, repeating, "You shoved me." The comments section below the video was already long. I braced myself for cruelty because that's how the internet usually is. Instead, I saw, "This broke my heart." Proud of her for standing up for herself. Been that waitress, nobody helped. This made me cry. I used to work for his dad's company. Not surprised the son acts like that. Next time I see something like this, I'm not staying quiet. I promise. Comment after comment. Some angry, some supportive, some sharing their own stories. It was like my humiliation had cracked open a door for everyone else's. My chest tightened. I put the phone down and covered my face with my hands. I didn't know whether to be grateful or overwhelmed. Maybe both. My stomach knotted when I thought about going to work. Was I supposed to act normal? Was everyone going to stare? Would customers come in just to see the waitress from the video? I didn't want my life to become some sort of spectacle for curious strangers. But I also didn't want fear to decide what I did next. Fear had been making decisions for me for years. It had done a terrible job. I carefully slid out of bed so I wouldn't wake Ethan, padded softly to the kitchen, and started the coffee machine. The smell of cheap coffee filled the small apartment, mixing with the faint scent of last night's dish soap. A few minutes later, I heard little feet padding down the hallway. Ethan came out in his dinosaur pajamas, hair sticking up everywhere. "Morning, buddy," I said, kneeling to his height. "You sleep okay?" He rubbed his eyes and nodded. "Do you have to work tonight?" "Not tonight," I said, stroking his hair. "I think tonight I stay with you." "Good," he mumbled, leaning into me. "I don't like when you come home super late." "I miss you." "I miss you too," I said, hugging him tighter than usual. "But you know why I work, right?" He thought for a second. "So we can have mac and cheese, and my inhaler, and my dinosaur birthday party someday." I laughed softly, even as tears pricked my eyes. "Yeah, all of that." My phone buzzed again. This time it was Tom calling. I picked it up. "Hey," I said, trying to sound composed. "Hey, Sarah," he said. "How are you holding up?" I glanced at Ethan, who was now climbing onto a chair, trying to reach the cereal. "I've been better," I admitted. "I'm okay." "Listen," Tom said, voice more serious. "The video, it blew up. It's on the local news page now. A reporter called the bar this morning. They want to talk to you." My heart skipped. "What?" "No. I don't know. I don't want cameras in my face. I didn't ask for this." "I know," he said. "And you don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with." I told them I couldn't speak for you. I pressed my fingers to my temple. "What about him?" "Last I heard, he spent the night in holding," Tom replied. "His father's lawyers are involved, obviously. There'll be a hearing. They'll probably try to spin it. But we have the video, we have witnesses, and..." He hesitated. "And honestly, public opinion is not exactly on his side right now." Images of comment sections flashed through my mind. The idea that people I'd never met were talking about me at breakfast tables, on their couches, on their phones at red lights, it was a lot. "Do I have to come in today?" I asked. "No," Tom said immediately. "Stay home, actually. Take the next 3 days, paid." I meant what I said last night. "Tom, are you sure you can afford?" "I'm sure I can't afford not to," he said. "This place needs to change. And part of that means taking care of the people who hold it together." My throat tightened. "Thank you," I whispered. "Also," he added, "someone came in early this morning, older guy. Left something for you. Said you'd know who it was from." "Bill?" I asked. "Yeah, that was the name," he said. "I put it in the office. You can pick it up when you're ready." After we hung up, I poured cereal for Ethan and made toast for myself, but my appetite wasn't really there. My mind kept spinning. The world used to feel so indifferent to me. Now it was staring right at me, and I didn't know how to stand under that kind of attention without shrinking. Around noon, after cartoons and Lego towers, and answering a lot of Ethan's questions about dinosaurs, I called my neighbor to ask if she could watch him for an hour. I didn't tell her everything, just that I needed to run to the bar and wouldn't be long. She agreed like she always did, kind and steady. The bus ride to Casey's felt surreal. I noticed a couple of people glancing at me for longer than usual, like they were trying to place my face. For the first time in my life, strangers' eyes on me didn't feel like judgment. It felt like recognition, and that was almost scarier. When I walked into the bar, it was quiet too early for the rush. The air smelled like coffee and disinfectant. Tom was behind the counter, going over some paperwork. He looked up and gave me a small smile. "Hey," he said. "You didn't have to come in today." "I know," I replied. "I just needed to see the place in the daylight, I guess." He nodded, like he understood more than my words said. "Bill's envelope is in the office," he said, gesturing toward the back. "Go ahead." In the office, on the desk, there was a plain white envelope with Sarah written on it in shaky, deliberate handwriting. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper and some cash, more than I was comfortable with anyone just giving me. On the paper, in simple writing, it said, "For bruises that don't show up on skin. Don't let last night turn into just another story you tell yourself about why you're small. You're not." "Bill," I sat down slowly, my chest tight. I didn't want to accept the money, it felt like charity. But then I thought of Ethan's inhaler, of the overdue electricity bill sitting on my counter, of how many times I've been forced to swallow dignity just to get by. Maybe sometimes help is just the universe's way of returning what you've been putting out in small, unnoticed ways for years. When I walked back out, I handed the money to Tom. "Put this toward my tab," I started to say, but he pushed my hand back gently. "Keep it," he said firmly. "From what I hear, you've earned more than this from the world and didn't get it. Let at least one good thing go your way without arguing." I laughed weakly. "You're getting good at speeches," he shrugged. "Hanging around Bill, I guess." Before I left, Tom hesitated, then said, "Sarah, the reporter called again while you were in the office. If you don't want to talk to them, I'll tell them you're not available, but if you do, this could be a chance to say something that isn't just about last night. Something bigger." The idea of cameras and microphones made my stomach twist. But another thought slipped in. How many times had I wished someone had said something when they had the platform and the words? How many stories like mine had stayed hidden because the people in them felt too small to speak? "I'll think about it," I said. On the way home, the city looked different. Not visually, same cracked sidewalks, same gray buildings, same buses groaning down the street, but energetically. Like the roles had shifted slightly. Like I was no longer just a background character in other people's stories. I was a person with a story that had weight, that had landed in other people's hearts and stirred something. That night, after Ethan fell asleep on the couch with a blanket over him and a cartoon still playing softly, I sat at the small kitchen table and opened my notebook. Normally, I used it to track tips, bills, and grocery lists. This time, I started writing something else. I wrote about last night, the shove, the silence, the moment Bill stood up, the way people woke up around me. I wrote about every time I'd felt invisible before that, when a customer had snapped fingers at me like I was a dog, when a man had whispered something disgusting in my ear as if my body was part of the menu, when someone had said, "Smile, it's not that bad," without ever asking what it was. As I wrote, a pattern emerged. It wasn't random. It was a cycle. People with a little power testing how far they could go. People without power convincing themselves it was easier to let it slide. Everyone pretending the damage was smaller than it really was. Last night had snapped that cycle just a little. Thinking back on it, I realized there was something else at play, too, something I'd never been able to name but had always felt. That invisible chain between what people think, what they allow, what they tolerate, and what eventually explodes into reality. The way a tiny thought of "she doesn't matter" can become a joke, then a touch, then a shove, then worse. The way, on the other side, a tiny thought of "this isn't right" can become a word, then a stand, then a wave that changes the whole room. It made me think, maybe nothing is isolated. Maybe everything we think and do sends out a kind of echo, and at some point, those echoes come back. A few days later, I agreed to meet the reporter, but only at the bar, with Tom there, during closed hours. I wore my least worn-out jeans and a plain black shirt, still feeling like I didn't belong in front of a camera. The reporter was younger than I expected, with sincere eyes and a notebook full of messy handwriting. The cameraman adjusted the light, and I tried not to flinch under its brightness. "You don't have to say anything you're uncomfortable with," the reporter said. "We can stop whenever you want." I nodded, my palms sweaty. When the camera started rolling, I stared at the lens and, instead of seeing strangers, I pictured Ethan watching someday when he was older. I pictured all the women and men out there who'd been shoved physically, emotionally, mentally, and told to calm down, get over it, or stop being dramatic. So I spoke. I didn't rehash every detail of the shove. They had the video for that. I talked about what it felt like to show up every night, to serve people with a smile, to carry plates and problems at the same time. I talked about how easy it is for people to dismiss someone in an apron, someone behind a counter, someone in a uniform. How easy it is to forget that the person with a name tag has a whole life, a whole world of worries and hopes you never see. I talked about the silence, the part that had hurt the most. How the room froze. How for a moment, it felt like everyone was deciding whether I deserved help. And then I talked about the moment that followed, when one person stood up, then another, then another. About how power can shift when people decide they're tired of watching cruelty happen a few feet away. The reporter asked me, "What do you hope comes out of this?" I thought about it for a long moment. I don't want this to be about making one guy into a villain and me into a saint, I said. I want it to be about the choices we all make. When you see something wrong, do you laugh along, do you look away, or do you say, "No, not here, not tonight"? Tom listened from the side, his eyes glassy. When the story aired a few days later, people at the grocery store looked at me a little longer, but not like I was an exhibit. More like they were seeing me clearly for the first time. A cashier said quietly, "I saw your story." That was brave. A woman in the pharmacy line whispered, "My daughter went through something like that. Thank you for saying what she couldn't." At work, the changes Tom promised started to show. A sign went up near the entrance. "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who disrespects our staff." It wasn't just words, he backed it up. When a man snapped his fingers at me one night, Tom walked over and said evenly, "We don't treat people like that here. You can speak to her respectfully, or you can leave." The man apologized. To me, it felt like the ground had shifted an inch in the right direction. My raise kicked in on the next paycheck, and for the first time in a long time, the gap between what I needed and what I had didn't feel like a bottomless pit. It was still a gap, but not an impossible one. The paid days off meant I could take Ethan to the park in the afternoon instead of dropping him at the neighbor's and rushing to the bus. Watching him race across the grass, laughing, breathing without wheezing for once, I felt something expand in my chest. One evening, a few weeks after the incident, Bill came in again, as he always did, and sat at his usual spot at the counter. I poured him his coffee without asking. "You're famous now," he teased lightly. I rolled my eyes with a small smile. "Not really," he shrugged. "You're famous enough that my sister called me and said, 'That waitress of yours,' she said what I wish I'd said 20 years ago. I say that counts for something." I leaned against the counter for a moment, resting my sore feet. "You know what scares me?" I said quietly. "What's that?" "That people will forget," I said. "That this will be just another video in a sea of videos. That everyone will say, 'That's so awful,' and then go back to normal." Bill sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Maybe some will," he said, "but not all. You can't always see how the seeds you plant grow. Some of them sprout in places you'll never visit. Seeds? I repeated. Yeah, he said. Every thought, every word, every action like a seed. Some people plant cruelty, entitlement, and think they'll harvest love and respect. Doesn't work that way. You plant poison, you get poison. Might take a while, but it comes back around. He nodded toward me. You planted something else, whether you meant to or not. A different idea about what we shouldn't let slide anymore. And that doesn't just disappear. I let his words sink in. They matched something I've been feeling but hadn't found the language for. The way life seemed to run on quiet laws that no one had written down, but everyone still obeyed, whether they knew it or not. The way energy moved through situations, how one person's decision to stay silent or to speak could tilt the whole scene. I thought about that night again. About how easily it could have gone another way, how I could have gotten up, apologized for dropping the drinks, laughed nervously, swallowed the pain, and gone back to serving them. If Bill hadn't stood up, if the girl hadn't recorded, if Tom hadn't found his voice, maybe the shove would have just become another story I told myself in the dark to prove the world was cruel and I was small. Instead, something else had happened. Not magic. Not a miracle. Just cause and effect, shifted by choices. My thoughts, their thoughts, our choices, all mixing into something bigger than any one of us. That night, after my shift, I walked home instead of taking the bus. It was cold, but the kind of cold that wakes you up, not the kind that numbs you. The sky was clear, stars faintly visible between the streetlights. Cleveland wasn't exactly known for being beautiful at night, but there was something quietly pretty about it if you looked closely. A reflection in a puddle, a cat slipping through a fence, a neighbor laughing on a porch. I thought about how, for so long, I believed my life was something that happened to me. Like I was always reacting, never directing. Always surviving, never shaping. But lately, I'd begun to suspect that, even in the tightest circumstances, there were still choices I could make that mattered, where I put my attention, what thoughts I fed, what behavior I allowed near me. When I said, enough, that doesn't mean I suddenly became some fearless warrior overnight. I still worried about money. I still caught myself shrinking out of habit when someone raised their voice. I still had nights where I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I'd messed everything up by speaking too loudly in a world that profits from people keeping quiet. But something had definitely changed. The next time a man at the bar tried to touch my arm, as a joke, I stepped back, looked him straight in the eye and said, "Don't touch me," not with a giggle. Not with an apology. Just a clear boundary. And when he rolled his eyes and muttered something under his breath, the woman next to him said, "Yeah, dude, don't touch her. It's basic respect." Little shifts. One night, a younger waitress came into the staff room crying after a customer called her a name because she'd forgotten his extra ketchup. I sat next to her, handed her a tissue, and told her about the time I thought being polite meant accepting anything. I told her what I learned, that kindness doesn't mean letting people walk over you. That you're allowed to take up space, even at work, especially at work. She wiped her eyes and whispered, "I saw your video," I thought. If she can stand up and not lose everything, maybe I can too. I exhaled slowly, feeling the invisible threads connecting all of us, through stories, through small acts of courage, through moments when we decide to show up for ourselves, instead of abandoning ourselves again. Weeks turned into months. The legal process around the shove played out mostly in the background. I gave a statement. Lawyers sent letters. His family tried to push for a lesser consequence, but the video made it hard to twist the narrative completely. Last I heard, he ended up with community service and a record that wouldn't just disappear. Some people said it wasn't enough. Maybe they were right. But I also knew that, for someone who never had to face any consequence at all, even a small one was a crack in a very thick wall. One thing stayed with me though. I heard through someone that his father had seen the video and, for once, couldn't defend his son's behavior. I didn't take joy in that. But I did take a strange kind of satisfaction in the idea that the image he'd built of himself as a man of values had been forced to confront the reality reflected back by his own child. Mirrors everywhere, whether we like them or not. At home, life kept going. Ethan lost another tooth. I saved a little extra from each paycheck. I even started looking at community college websites at night after he went to sleep, wondering if maybe, just maybe, I could one day study something else. Maybe nursing, maybe social work. Something that involved taking care of people in a way that didn't require me to wear a bow tie and paper-thin sneakers on greasy floors. I didn't know how I'd get there. But for the first time, I believed the path wasn't completely closed. One night, after putting Ethan to bed, I sat on the couch with my phone and opened the video again. Not because I liked watching it, I didn't. It still made my chest tight. But I watched it to remind myself of something very specific. I watched myself fall. I watched the room freeze. I watched the moment my eyes lifted and met Bill's. I watched the exact second I decided not to pretend it was fine. That second to me is what the whole story is about. Not the shove, not the handcuffs, not the comments or the headlines. The second a tired, underpaid waitress decided she was done agreeing with the version of herself that said, "You're small. Take it. Be quiet." That's the moment I hope people see when they watch it. The moment they can borrow if they need it. If you're listening to this right now, maybe you've been in a room like that where something ugly happened and your heart screamed, "This isn't right," but your mouth stayed shut. Maybe you've been the one on the floor, looking up at a crowd, wondering if you mattered enough for anyone to move. Or maybe you've been somewhere in between, convincing yourself that staying out of it was neutral, even though, deep down, you knew silence tilts to one side every time. Here's what I've learned from that night in the bar. The world doesn't just happen to us, we're feeding it all the time. With what we tolerate, with what we excuse, with what we laugh at, with what we ignore, and also with what we stand up for, what we protect, what we refuse to let slide. Thoughts become attitudes, attitudes become words, words become actions, actions become habits. Habits become the kind of world we live in. That means every small choice matters. Every time you decide, not here, not this time, you're nudging reality a little bit in a different direction. I'm just a waitress, a mom, a woman trying to keep the lights on and her kid healthy. I don't have a fancy degree or a big platform. I don't always say the right thing, and I'm scared more often than I like to admit. But that night taught me something I will never unlearn. Even people who feel small are still part of the balance. You think your voice doesn't count until the moment you use it and watch a whole room rearrange around it. So I'll end this the way I end most nights now, when I walk home alone under the streetlights, replaying the day and asking myself if I fed the right side of things. If this story touched you, don't just scroll past it. Let it move something in you. Hit the like button if you want more people to hear it. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded they're not invisible. And most of all, tell me in the comments. When the room freezes and everyone is watching, what kind of person do you want to be?